Good evening, everybody. I hope that you're having a wonderful evening tonight. We're trying a different setup. As you can see, this is kind of our more normal setup for when we're together in the building. And we're going to try this setup tonight and see how you like it by using our actual PowerPoint screen that we have in here and see if you can see that. Been experiment with a lot of different ways to record these. Just kind of for my own interest, but also to keep things different and hopefully to keep your attention. And so I hope that you like this setup that we have tonight as we're going to continue our series here in the book of Proverbs. Now, we've studied a lot so far about the book of Proverbs, but all of what we've studied has centered around what we see in the New Testament, that God wants us to live wise and productive lives. It's here in Ephesians chapter 5, beginning in verse 15, that Paul says, "Look carefully then how you walk." Remember, we have said that phrase, "look carefully," means to be precise. Be very careful how you walk, and to walk is to live in the New Testament. Those are synonymous ideas. Be precise at how you live. He says, not as unwise, but as wise. And we're studying through the book of Proverbs as a book that is full of wisdom. And so Ephesians 5:15 has kind of been our theme verse as we've gone through this study, the New Testament principle that we've come back to time and time again. And we've studied a lot so far out of the book of Proverbs. We have studied so far the idea in verses 1 through 6 of what we call the preamble. It is what prepares us for what we find in verse 7 as the theme of Proverbs, which is that God wants us to fear Him. And Solomon communicates that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and fools despise wisdom and instruction. And so we've discussed the preamble, the theme, and then we began 2 Sundays ago with the last part of chapter 1. Now, remember, we've broken chapter 1 into 4 parts. The preamble, the theme verse, the wisdom speech number 1, and then tonight we're going to study wisdom speech number 2, 4 parts. So you have the introductory ideas, and now we're moving into wisdom speech number 2. And this wisdom speech is found in Proverbs chapter 1, verses 20 through 33. Here in just a moment, we're going to read through that entire passage. We're going to look at some ideas in it and kind of draw it all together. But before we do that, I do want to let you in on some information about this second part of the book of Proverbs. Now, if you'll remember Proverbs chapter 1, verses 8 through 19, we studied about the importance of listening to the advice of those who are older. Now, Solomon, in his position with his son here, specifically speaks about children listening to their parents. And we talked about the importance of listening to parents in that passage, verses 8 through 19 of Proverbs chapter 1. But this is wisdom speech number 2, which approaches the idea of wisdom from a completely different perspective. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 1, this second part of chapter 1, wisdom is not described as something that is passed from one person to the next or something that we seek after, but rather, as we're about to read, wisdom is personified as someone that is seeking us. Specifically, it's personified as a woman. We're going to call her Lady Wisdom as we study through tonight. But Proverbs chapter 1, beginning in verse 20, stops talking about wisdom as this thing that I'm seeking after, but now it changes direction and says, wisdom is seeking after me. In fact, wisdom is calling out to me, and we'll talk about that in the text tonight. But wisdom here in this passage is personified as a woman. Now, this is done many times through chapters 1 through 9 of the book of Proverbs. You know, chapters 1 through 9 are a little bit more narrative in their essence. It's a little bit more of theoretical stories, situations placed up to show us the importance of wisdom and knowledge. And then from chapter 10 on through the end, we'll talk about that later. Those are kind of the more proverbial statements we're used to. So in chapters 1 through 9, wisdom is referred to as a woman many different times. For instance, in Proverbs chapter 8, beginning in verse 1, wisdom is portrayed as a woman this way. Does not wisdom call? Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights, beside the way, at the crossroads she takes her stand. Beside the gates in front of the town and at the entrance of the portals she cries aloud, "To you, O men, I cry, and my cry is to the children of men. O simple ones, learn prudence. O fools," she says, learn sense. It's again here in chapter 9, beginning in verse 1. Wisdom has built her house. Proverbs 9 and verse 1. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts and has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her young women to call from the highest place to the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn here. To him who lacks sense, she says, come eat of my bread and drink of my wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live and walk in the way of insight. In these two passages, including chapter 1 that we're going to study this evening, wisdom is portrayed as a woman who cries out and speaks to others. But wisdom isn't the only thing portrayed as a woman in the book of Proverbs, because the very opposite of wisdom being a woman is portrayed in that folly is also portrayed as a woman. And so as we're going to look through chapters 1 through 9, you're going to see kind of this constant tug and pull between woman wisdom and woman folly, lady wisdom and lady folly. And we see lady folly, for instance, in Proverbs chapter 9, and we're going to begin in verse 13. The woman folly is loud. She is seductive and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes seat on the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by who are going straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn here. To him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. That's an important phrase that we're going to study later on in this series of lessons. But he does not know the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. And so not only in the book of Proverbs is wisdom portrayed as a woman, but foolishness or folly is also portrayed as a woman. And in both cases, the woman wisdom and the woman folly are both calling out, trying to draw our attention. And so Solomon writes to his son about how to listen to these many conflicting voices that he's going to hear. And so we see this principle of wisdom and folly being a woman. And that's exactly what this second wisdom speech is all about. It's about Lady Wisdom and her crying out and the response that some give her and the response that others give her. One response is positive, one response is negative, and she's pleading and making a warning for people to listen to her, and we're going to see it in these passages. And so let's look at Proverbs chapter 1, beginning in verse 20, read down through verse 33. I've just got a few points I want to make to you, and then we'll move into chapter 2 next Sunday night, and I think that'll be very beneficial. Okay, Proverbs chapter 1, starting in verse 20. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the market she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy streets she cries out. At the entrance of the gate she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Because I have called and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come toward you or upon you, then they will call upon me and I will not answer. They will seek me diligently but will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel and despised all my reproof. Therefore shall they eat the fruit of their way and have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease within dread of disaster. I see wisdom basically doing three things in this 13-verse section. The first is that wisdom pleads, or she calls out. Wisdom gives a warning, and then wisdom summarizes what she said. So those are the three steps we're going to look at. She makes a plead or a calling, she warns, and then she summarizes what's going to happen to those who heed and do not heed her warning. Let's begin here with this first section. She cries out. Wisdom cries out and makes a plea. Verses 20 through 23. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the market she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy street she cries out. At the entrance of the city gate she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Proverbs chapter 1, verses 20 through 23. Wisdom makes a plea. The first thing we see in verses 20 and 21 is that her plea is made publicly. Wisdom is not a person who hides in the back streets and corners, according to Proverbs chapter 1. She's not one that whispers behind closed doors. She is a very public person. She's a figure that is out in the open on the city squares and the streets, and she's making her claims openly, calling people to come and to listen to her. And she's making this crying aloud out of verse 20. That's kind of like the town crier or the sentinel that heeds out the warning. She's giving out this huge burst of warning to the people who would listen to her that they need to heed her call. She makes her call out loud outside in the open squares and the city. She cries in the cities and the streets and the gates of the cities. She's not hidden. Here's the beautiful thing about wisdom. A wisdom is not some elusive, esoteric thing that tries to duck and hide, and it becomes very difficult for you and I to find. According to Proverbs chapter 1, wisdom cries out in the streets. Wisdom is a very public thing, and she wants people to come and hear her and to heed what she has to say. But of course, as we have this idea of her plea being made public, it's something that must be listened to. You see, wisdom isn't something like Solomon that I just passively pray for and I get without having to put a little legwork in. That's not how wisdom is talked about anywhere in the Bible. God gives us wisdom, and the wisdom of God is from above, but God teaches us wisdom so many different ways. Wisdom is something I should listen to and follow. And so wisdom, according to Proverbs 1, she's not hidden. She's not hiding anywhere behind some dark alley in the corners of the city, but yet she's out in the open. And so she raises her voice in the markets. She heeds out this noisy cry in the streets. And she asks the people, according to verse 22, she asks them something very particular to very specific people. So our first point, they're all on the screen. I meant to have them animated, but they're all on the screen. Not only does she cry out publicly, but our second point under her plea is that she cries out to the people who need her. As we've already talked about, and as we're studying through Proverbs, every person needs wisdom. And she asks this question in verse 22 that I found so telling. She says, "How long, O simple ones, scoffers, and fools?" How long? Now, that question, how long, is not really a question. It's more of like this prolific implied statement where she's saying, okay, listen, I'm crying out in the streets. You've had enough time. Are you ready to listen? How long is it before you're going to heed my warning? It's time for you to listen, is what she's implying. And she speaks to a number of different people, simple people. You know, all of us need to listen to wisdom. We all need to heed the calling of Lady Wisdom. The people who are simple are the ones who are naive. They're easily influenced by others. Some of us are that way. Some of us are very easily influenced. It's our job to listen to wisdom. She says, how long, simple ones, are you going to love being simple? When are you going to deepen your understanding and become mature? Scoffers, or scorners, your translation may say, are the people who are cynical. They're defiant. They go against God, and they're not going to believe what they're told. How long, scoffers, will you delight in your scoffing? They delight in the fact that they're cynical. They delight in the fact that they hate God and they hate God's ways and they ridicule other people. How long are you going to wait, wisdom says? How long are you going to wait from quitting to put other people down? How long are you going to wait till you stop getting rid of your attitude towards other people and towards God? When are you going to listen, wisdom says? She cries out to the people who don't want to listen to her because they're simple or because they are defiant. They're cynical to wisdom. But she also reaches out to those who are fools. And the fools, as she defines them here, are the people who hate knowledge. They hate the understanding of what God wants us to have. They passionately reject what it is that God wants us to use, and that's the knowledge and the wisdom in our brain. But fools hate that. And we've already talked about fools at a great detail. The New Testament talks about people like this, but it calls them by something different. Not fools. Jesus uses this phrase as well as Paul does in Ephesians chapter 4 as being hard-hearted. Fools are hard-hearted. They won't listen to wisdom as she cries out. And wisdom is saying in Proverbs 1 and verse 22, it's time to listen. How long are you going to wait? How long are you going to wait to listen to me and to heed my warning? And so wisdom, she cries out publicly. She's not hidden. She's public. She cries out to the people who need her. And finally, publicly, she's crying out to those who need her that they may be filled with wisdom. It's verse 23 where she says, if you turn at my reproof, I'll pour my Spirit out to you, and I'll make my words known to you. I can't get past the obvious connection of the Spirit being poured out in verse 23 of Proverbs 1, and then, of course, the promise of the Spirit in Joel 2 and verse 28 that Peter later quotes in Acts chapter 2, that God was going to pour His Spirit out. Just as the Spirit was poured out through Joel chapter 2 and verse 28, we should understand that when wisdom speaks of pouring her Spirit out, that it is connected directly to knowledge. She says, I need you to turn when I give you wisdom, when I give you advice. I need you to turn and listen to me. And if you do, I'm going to pour that wisdom out on you. The pouring out of the Spirit was the wisdom of the knowledge of God. It was the revelation of God and His ultimate will and the gospel to be preached and people to be communicated with through speaking in tongues. And the pouring out of the Spirit was an identification of the people of God. That pouring out of the Spirit is exactly connected here to wisdom pouring out her Spirit and making my words known to you. And so wisdom stands ready to forgive. She stands ready to bless the people who have the hearts and minds willing to listen to her, which is the key idea of the wise person in the book of Proverbs. A wise person listens to others. And so wisdom makes her plea. She wants people to listen to her. However, that's not always the case, because wisdom also, she doesn't just make a plea, but she also gives a warning. Wisdom doesn't just make a plea, but number two, she gives a warning. First, she gives a warning to those who refuse to hear her. Proverbs chapter 1 verses 24 and 25 says, because I have called you and you refused to listen. There's the word refused. You refused to listen, have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded. You've ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof. You're not going to listen to me, she says. Verses 24 and 25. It is the people, she says, who did not pay attention. You ignored the things I had to say, my counsel, my advice, my wisdom. You're ignoring the things that I'm trying to tell you, the things I'm trying to ingrain into your mind. I remember on many distinct occasions going to math class in high school and then getting home to do my homework and thinking, I didn't listen to a thing that teacher said. Why didn't I listen? Most of the time I was distracted. I had attention issues, but I was distracted and I didn't listen to what the teacher said. And I would get home and I would say, man, I should have listened so that I would know what to do. Wisdom is saying, why didn't you listen? You should have heeded what I had to say, but because you didn't, there's going to be issues. They didn't listen to her counsel. They refused to listen to what she said. It reminds me of what is said in 2 Chronicles chapter 36. 2 Chronicles 36, at the very end of this book, 2 Chronicles 36, verse 15. Notice what is said about the people of Israel. 2 Chronicles 36, starting in verse 15. The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by His messengers, because He had compassion on His people and on His dwelling place. God was constantly sending them messengers, prophets, telling them to return and to change. He used the judges as a way to do that. Verse 16, but they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising His words and scoffing at His prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against His people, until there was no remedy. Israel rejected her prophets. What about us? When wisdom cries out to us in the streets, in her public way, to all who will listen to her, will we reject her counsel? Will we disregard her hand that is given out trying to sustain us and help us? Will we listen to wisdom? If not, she says, you're going to be like those people in 2 Chronicles. You're going to be one who rejected what I said, and it's not going to be a good end. I'm reminded all throughout the book of Proverbs of people who rejected advice and how important advice really is. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 15 says this, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes. But notice, a wise man listens to advice. You want to be a wise man? Proverbs 12:15 says, listen to the advice of others. You know, there are some people that are so full of their own knowledge and they think they have everything so laid out in place, they don't listen to other people's advice. Or, even more dangerous than that, they only listen to the advice of a biased and an unbalanced advisor. It is just as dangerous for you and I to listen to nobody's advice as it is to listen to one unbalanced and biased advisor. One person who is set in their ways, and I listen to them and I think they hung the moon and I listen to them all the time and I don't ever consider any other opinions. What a deadly and a foolish way to live. Wise people seek out the advice of others. And Proverbs is filled with that. We're going to see that theme as we study. And so wisdom, in her response to the people who have rejected her, she has a very personal reaction. And she also talks about the consequences of a fool's stupid behavior. First, let's look at her personal reactions beginning in verse 26. Because you didn't listen, because you didn't heed my hand that I had stretched out to help you, because you ignored my counsel and you wouldn't listen to my reproof. You wouldn't listen to me trying to correct you. You ignored it. You were a fool, she says. I will also laugh at your calamity, verse 26. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm or your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, they would have none of my counsel and despised all my reproof, wisdom says. She has a very personal reaction, a reaction that is very strong in language, almost to the fact that it may push you back a little bit. She says, I'm going to laugh, verse 26, at your calamity, and I'll mock when terror strikes you. Why? Why is she saying that? It's almost as if wisdom is using this phrase that we all use sometimes, but that we hate when other people use against us. It's those words, I told you so. It's like wisdom is saying, listen, I told you. I told you calamity was coming, told you problems were coming. I gave you the advice and the counsel to avoid it and you didn't listen. So, hey, I told you so. It's almost as if she is saying, why didn't you listen to me? She's going to laugh and mock at their terror and destruction, which comes on them like a storm. And just like in a storm, when we're in the midst of it, we lose all control of our circumstances because we have not prepared beforehand. Wisdom says when you go through foolishly thinking in life, you come to the storm of life, you lose all control of your circumstances. She says, I'm going to be of no help when calamity comes. You're going to search for me, she says in verse 28, but I'm not going to answer. You're going to try and seek after me, but you're not going to find me. Why? Because you rejected me when I was available. So often we do this. We want what's best for us when we need it, but we're unwilling to be prepared for what's best for us now. We don't make preparations, and then when time comes, everybody, they scatter and they try to find what they need. Wisdom says you should have listened when you had the chance, when I was available to you. Wisdom needs to be heeded when it's offered, but when it's no longer offered, it's too late. So she says, I'm not going to come help in this calamity. She says, no help's going to come when trouble comes upon you. And then finally, in the last section, it says that they're going to suffer the fate of their folly. It's verse 31. The screen says Saul, but the end of that's supposed to say so. The idea is that you're going to reap what you sow, verse 31. The fruit of their way they shall eat, and have their fill of their own devices. It's as if they're eating the emptiness of their own devices, and they're not getting filled up. They're not being sustained because they are eating the fruit of what they've already sown. Galatians chapter 6, be not deceived. Whatever a man sows, that will he also reap. We reap the benefit, the harvest, and the fruit of the things we've done previously in life. It's not a principle of karma. It's the principle of sowing and reaping that was made by the Lord. When I sow something bad into the world, you better believe something bad's coming back. When I sow good into the world, don't you know good's coming back? You reap what you sow. And the contrast of this, when righteousness is a part of my life and trials come, I will sow the goodness at one point. Then when trials come, I'll reap the goodness of what I've sown. It's a suffering of the fate. But unfortunately here in Proverbs 1, it's a negative way. The fools who don't listen to wisdom, the fools who don't hear her knowledge and heed it, she says, you're going to reap what you sow. Listen to me. Gain wisdom. If not, calamity's coming and you're going to seek for me and I'm not going to be there because you haven't made preparations. We could take that and apply that to so many principles in the New Testament about Jesus coming back, preparing our life as Christians, like what we talked about in our lesson this morning about obeying the gospel. Why have some people not obeyed the gospel? Why are there people who have yet to do it? It's because they're not making preparations. Folks, get the wisdom of God. Soak it up when He says that we need to be prepared. So finally, wisdom comes and she gives a summary that the final idea of Proverbs chapter 1 is destruction versus security. Those who don't heed her, destruction is on the way. Fools bring about destruction in their own life. That's the principle of Lady Wisdom. She stands on the street corners and cries, "Fools, listen up. Wisdom is here and you need to heed me. You need to listen because calamity's coming. Be prepared." But some people don't listen, and because they don't listen, bad things happen. Verse 32, the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. Because they turn away from true wisdom, because they allow their complacency, their regard towards wisdom, they're happy with what they know and they don't seek after more to grow. Because they're happy with it, it is ultimately to their destruction. But verse 33, whoever listens to me will dwell secure. You listen to wisdom, you're going to dwell secure. You're going to feel the security of the wisdom of God. Are you willing to listen to His wisdom? It's in the book of Proverbs chapter 8. This is our last passage. Proverbs chapter 8 and verse 35 that says this. We're going to start maybe a few verses before that. Let's start at verse 32. And now, O sons, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise. Do not neglect it. Blessed is the one who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, watching beside my doors. For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. Let's add verse 36. But he who fails to find me injures himself. All who hate me love death. Folks, the whole principle of wisdom speech number 2. And remember, Proverbs 1 is all about the introductory matters. We're still dealing with the introduction to the book. Us understanding foolishness and wisdom and knowledge and simplicity and prudence. And as we're trying to understand the context of Proverbs and what Solomon's trying to communicate, he ends chapter 1 with this speech of Lady Wisdom as she cries out and says, if you don't listen to me, death is around the corner. But if you listen, you'll be secure. Even if death comes your way, you're secure by listening in the wisdom of God. So Lady Wisdom, she has a lot to say. Are you willing to listen to Lady Wisdom, to gain it? Because as we go through these next few chapters, everything we study, and we're going to move a little bit faster. I wanted to spend my time in chapter 1. We're moving faster as we get into chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I want us to understand that wisdom is so valuable that it has an effect on my life beyond what I could ever imagine. Are you seeking after wisdom? She's crying out loud, but are you listening?